On a remote training moon orbiting the galactic core, cadets from dozens of species gathered to test their combat reflexes against autonomous drones. The air smelled of ozone and damp metal. The sky hung low and gray clouds drifted like slow ghosts. Over the domed arenas below the surface hummed with energy conduits and the soft pulse of defense grids. It was a place built for pressure, for stress, for breaking weak minds and forging strong ones. Among the cadets stood Lila, a quiet human woman, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a loose knot at the base of her neck. Her uniform fit too loosely, as if she had not bothered to adjust it to her frame. Her eyes were pale green and held a stillness that made others uneasy. She did not speak. Much she did not laugh at the jokes told in the mess hall. She did not join the sparring circles that formed after drills. Instead, she walked the perimeter paths alone, hands tucked into her pockets, watching the horizon as though expecting something to rise from it. The other cadets whispered about her behind her back. They said humans were soft, that they bled too easily, that their bones snapped under half the force it took to bruise a Krellian. They said humans had no natural defenses, no claws, no venom, no reinforced skin, no heat resistance, no sonar, no pheromone control. Nothing but clever hands and fragile minds. Lila heard the whispers but never reacted. She simply moved through the days like a shadow passing through light. The Academy was run by the Interstellar Alliance, a coalition of over 200 sentient species who believed in merit through trial. Every cadet, regardless of origin, had to pass the same tests, the same simulations, the same live drills. It was meant to be fair, but fairness did not erase instinct, and instinct told most species that humans were not warriors. They were builders, they were negotiators, they were healers, but not fighters. The first live drill of the cycle was scheduled for mid-morning. The arena had been cleared of debris from the previous night's simulation. The sand had been raked smooth, the safety barriers raised, the observation decks filled with instructors and senior officers, cadets lined up in rows according to species. The Firellians stood tall with their feathered crests flared. The Grath stood hunched, their armored hides gleaming under the artificial sun. The humans were grouped at the far end. Only 3 of them in the entire cohort. Leela and 2 others, both male. Both nervous, each cadet would face a Class 3 training drone alone. The drone was designed to mimic enemy tactics. It moved fast, it fired non-lethal plasma rounds, it adapted to the opponent's style, and it never stopped until the cadet yielded, or was incapacitated. Most species treated it as a challenge, a rite of passage. Some even enjoyed it. The first cadet stepped forward, a young Virelian named Kess. His movements were sharp. Confident, he activated his wrist shield and called out a taunt. The drone dropped from the ceiling on silent thrusters and attacked within seconds. Kess dodged, rolled, fired back with his pulse pistol. The drone countered every move, but after 3 minutes it slowed and powered down. Kess raised his arms in victory. The crowd cheered. The next cadet, a Grath female named Vora, used brute force. She charged the drone head-on, letting its plasma bolt sizzle against her thick hide. She grabbed it with both hands and crushed its chassis with a roar. The drone sparked and went dark. The instructors nodded approval. One by one, the cadets took their turn. Some lasted seconds, some minutes. A few failed badly. One Zenthi cadet fainted before the drone even launched. Most passed with moderate difficulty. The humans watched. In silence, their turn would come last as always. When it was Lila's turn, she walked into the arena without hesitation. The sand crunched under her boots. She wore no armor, no weapon, no shield. Just her standard issue uniform, and the same calm expression. She always had. The drone descended slowly, as if sensing something unusual. It hovered 10 feet above the ground, its red sensor eye scanning her. The instructor's voice echoed over the speakers. Initiate sequence Delta 3. The drone shot forward. Faster than any previous run, it did not test her. It attacked with full aggression. Plasma bolts seared the air around her. Lila moved not away but toward it. She sidestepped the first bolt, ducked under the second, and closed the distance in 3 strides. The drone spun midair, trying to reposition, but she was already on it. What happened next was caught only by the high-speed cameras, because to the naked eye it seemed impossible. Lila reached up, grabbed the drone's left manipulator arm, twisted it backward with a sharp motion that should have broken human bone. Instead, the drone's alloy joint snapped like dry twig. She yanked the limb free, sparks spraying from the socket. Then, with a single fluid motion, She drove her elbow into the drone's central housing, cracking its outer shell. She reached inside, pulled out the glowing core, and crushed it in her palm. The drone dropped to the sand. Dead silence fell over the arena. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause. The instructors stared at their screens, at first in disbelief, then in alarm. The drone was rated to withstand direct hits from heavy plasma rifles. Its chassis was forged from layered durasteel, its core encased in shock dampeners. And yet a baseline, human with no enhancements, had dismantled it with bare hands in under 8 seconds. Lila stood over the wreckage, breathing steadily. She looked at her palm. The core's energy had burned her skin, but the wound was already closing the skin, knitting together as if time itself was rushing to heal her. Someone in the observation deck whispered, "What is she?" Lila turned and walked back to the line without a word. The other cadets parted as she approached. No one met her eyes. The whispers that followed were different now, not mocking, but afraid. After the drill ended, the academy went into lockdown, not officially, but quietly. Security drones patrolled the corridors. Extra scans were run on all human cadets. Lila was summoned to the command wing. She went without protest in the sterile white room. 2 senior officers waited, one a tall avian with iridescent feathers, the other a short, stout being with 4 arms and milky eyes. They asked her questions, simple ones at first. Where were you born? Do you have any implants? Have you undergone genetic modification? Lila answered each truthfully. I was born on Earth. I have no implants. I am unmodified. They ran scans again. Full spectrum, bioresonance, neural mapping, cellular decay rate. Everything came back normal, human baseline, no anomalies. But the footage did not lie. They showed her the recording slowed to 1/10 speed, frame by frame. Even at that speed, her movements defied physics. Her muscles should have torn. Her tendons should have snapped. Her bones should have shattered under the strain. Yet there she was, whole, unharmed. They asked her how. She said, I do not know. They did not believe her. That night, Lila returned to her quarters. The academy was quiet, the usual hum of activity muted by the tension in the air. She sat on the edge of her cot and stared at her hands. They looked ordinary, calloused from drills, but otherwise unremarkable. Yet they had stopped a machine built to kill warriors outside her window. Something moved. She turned, and the tree line beyond the academy's outer fence, a small shape crouched low to the ground. It was no bigger than a large dog, but its form was unmistakable. Long neck-ridged spine, leathery wings folded against its back. Its scales shimmered like whetstone in the moonlight. Its eyes glowed faintly blue, a dragon, but not like the ancient war beasts of legend. This one was young, lean, almost feral. It watched her without blinking. Lila did not call for security. She did not sound an alarm. She simply stood and walked to the window. The dragon tilted its head, then let out a soft sound, not a growl, not a hiss, but a hum, low and resonant like a note from a forgotten song. Lila's breath caught. She knew that sound. It was in her dreams. She pressed her palm against the glass. The dragon mirrored her, pressing its snout to the other side for a long moment. They stayed like that, connected through the barrier. Then the dragon turned and vanished into the trees. Lila sat back down, her heart pounding. Not from fear, but from recognition. She did not remember much from before the age of 12, only fragments. A forest of tall, crystalline trees, a woman with pointed ears and silver hair singing in a language that made the air ripple, a small warm body curled against her chest, whispering dreams into her mind. She had always thought they were fantasies, but now she was not so sure. The next morning, the academy buzzed with rumors. Some said Lila was hiding forbidden tech. Others claimed she was a hybrid, part elf, part ghost, part something else entirely. The instructors increased surveillance, but Lila went about her routine as if nothing had changed. She attended lectures, ran drills, answered questions with short, precise words. But at night, she walked the perimeter, and every night the dragon was there. It never came close, never made a sound except that soft hum. It followed her from a distance, always watching, always waiting. The instructors dismissed it as a native predator drawn by curiosity. But Lila knew better. It was not drawn to her. It had found her, and it remembered her as the days passed. The tension in the academy grew. The Alliance was preparing for something big. Whispers of war drifted through secure channels, an ancient enemy. long, thought extinct had reappeared the Korax beings who fed on fear and erased memories. They had wiped out entire civilizations, leaving no trace. Not even in records, the Alliance believed humans would be their first target. Easy prey, soft minds, easy to break, but Lila knew the truth. Humans were not defenseless. They had her, and she had Nix, though she had not yet spoken the name aloud. She knew it was his. And soon the galaxy would learn that the weakest species held the command. Summoned Lila again, this time to a deeper level of the academy beneath the main dome, where the walls were lined with ancient stone brought from old Earth, and the air smelled of cold metal and ozone. The room had no windows, only a single table and 2 chairs, the kind used for interrogations, not discussions. 2 new officers waited for her. One was Commander Vaela, tall, thin being with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that reflected no light. The other was Dr. Marin, a human woman, in her late 50s with short gray hair and hands that never stopped moving. She tapped her data pad, adjusted her glasses, smoothed her coat over and over as if trying to hold herself. Together, they did not greet Lila. They did not offer her a seat. Stand there, they said, pointing to a marked circle on the floor. Lila obeyed. Dr. Marin activated. A series of scanners, beams of blue and gold light, passed over Lila's body from head to toe. The machines whirred and clicked, printing out results faster than anyone could read. Still nothing. The doctor muttered. Baseline human, no enhancements. No foreign DNA, no nanites, no cybernetics, no latent mutations. Commander Vael circled her slowly, like a predator testing the wind for scent. Then how did you disable the drone? I used my hands, Lila said. Do not insult us. I'm not the commander. Stopped in front of her, eyes narrowing. You moved faster than a Grath warrior. Your grip strength exceeded Class 5 industrial standards. Your skin resisted plasma, burns and healed within minutes. Explain. I do not know how you expect us to believe that. Lila looked at him, not with defiance, but with something quieter, something older. I expect you to see what is in front of you. The commander's jaw tightened. He turned to the doctor. Run the deep scan. Dr. Marin hesitated, then nodded. She stepped closer and placed a small disc against Lila's temple. The device glowed faintly, and Lila's vision blurred for a moment. Images flashed behind her eyes. Crystal trees, a silver-haired woman singing, a low hum, a small dragon curled in her lap, warm and breathing. She gasped. The machine beeped sharply. Dr. Marin pulled the disc away, her face pale. What did you see? Lila swallowed. Nothing clear, just fragments. The doctor exchanged a look with the commander, then said quietly, the scan detected neural activity in regions of the brain that are dormant in all known species, including humans, areas linked to spatial awareness, temporal perception, and reality anchoring. What does that mean? It means she might be able to sense things others cannot. The commander frowned, then turned back to Lila. You will remain under observation. You are not to leave your quarters. You are not to speak to other cadets. You are not to approach the perimeter. Lila said nothing. They escorted her back to her room and sealed the door with a coded lock. That night she lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling. The academy was silent, but she could feel something stirring beyond the walls, a low vibration in the ground, a whisper in the air. Then she heard it, the hum, soft, distant, but unmistakable. She sat up and went to the window. Nix stood at the edge of the tree line, his blue eyes fixed on her. He lifted one clawed foot and scraped it across the ground 3 times, slow, deliberate, a signal. Lila pressed her palm to the glass again, and after a moment she drew a single line downward with her finger. Weight. Nix tilted his head, then settled onto his haunches, tail curling around his body. He would wait. Over the next few days the academy changed. The usual drills were canceled. In their place came emergency briefings, security drills, lockdown simulations. The instructors spoke in hushed tones about breaches in the outer rim, about missing patrols, about signals that vanished mid-transmission. The cadets grew restless. Fear spread like smoke through the halls. Lila watched it all. From her window, she was not allowed to join the drills, but she saw the tension in the way others moved, the way they glanced at shadows, the way they jumped at sudden sounds. Fear was building, and something was feeding on its own. Evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned deep violet, Lila noticed something new. Nix was not alone. 3 other shapes moved in the trees, smaller than him, darker, less defined. They circled him like shadows given form. Nix growled, low in his throat, and bared his teeth. They backed away, but did not leave. Lila's skin prickled. Those were not animals. They were echoes. She had seen them in her dreams, beings that existed between moments, that fed on dread and confusion. The Korax were near. She turned from the window and paced her room. She needed to warn someone, but who would believe her, a confined human cadet, with no rank, no authority, no proof? Then she remembered the symbols in her dreams. The silver-haired woman had drawn them in the air with her fingers, circles within circles, lines that bent back on themselves. They were not writing, they were keys. Lila knelt on the floor and used her finger to trace one in the dust. As soon as the shape closed, the air in the room shimmered. A soft chime rang out like a bell underwater. Nix's head snapped up. Outside, he stared directly at her window, his eyes wide. He had heard it. Tooth. Next morning, the lock on her door clicked open without warning. Guard stood there, stiff and pale. "You are cleared for movement." Lila stepped out without a word. The academy felt different, colder. The lights flickered in the corridors. The air tasted stale. She walked to the mess hall, not because she was hungry, but because she needed to see the others. The cadets sat in clusters, but the usual chatter was gone. They ate in silence, eyes darting to the corners of the room. Some rubbed their arms as if cold, others kept glancing at the ceiling. Lila got a tray and sat alone. After a few minutes, a Varelian cadet approached hesitantly. It was Kes, the one who had fought the drone before. He sat across from her without asking. "They say you broke the drone with your bare hands," he said, voice lowiest. "They say you are not human." "I am human." He studied her, then leaned closer. "Something is wrong here. The dreams last night I saw things that were not there but felt real. My hands shook when I woke up." Lila nodded. "Others feel it too." He swallowed. "Then why are you not afraid?" "Because I know what is coming." Before he could ask more, the lights went out. A collective gasp rose from the hall. Emergency lights flickered on, casting long red shadows. Then the screaming started, not from the hall but from the training wing. Lila stood and Rankus followed. They reached the arena entrance to find chaos. Instructors shouting, cadets stumbling over each other. In the dark in the center of the sand stood a figure, tall, thin, shifting like smoke. Its eyes were empty holes, its mouth stretched too wide, and when it spoke no sound came out, but everyone heard it in their minds. "You are already forgotten." Cadets dropped to their knees, clutching their heads, tears streaming down their faces. Lila stepped forward. The figure turned to her. "You remember," it said, surprised. "Ida the thing." Plunged. Lila did not flinch. She raised her hand and traced the symbol in the air, the same one she had drawn in her room. Light erupted from her palm, not bright, but deep like the heart of a star. The figure shrieked and dissolved into mist. Silence returned. The cadets looked up, dazed. The instructors stared at Lila as if seeing her for the first time. But Lila was already running toward the perimeter. Nix met her at the fence, his wings half spread, his body tense. He knew the Korax were testing the academy, and they would be back that night. Lila did not return to her room. She and Nix disappeared into the forest beyond the dome. The instructors searched for her but found no trace, only claw marks on the ground and a single symbol carved into a tree, circles within circles, a warning, a promise deep in the woods. Lila sat with Nix curled beside her. She placed her hand on his head and closed her eyes. Memories came clearer. Know where Mother had been, an elf from Silthar, a guardian of the veil, the thin layer between realities. The Korax had hunted her kind for centuries because the veil walkers could see them, could fight them, could erase them. To protect Lila, her mother had hidden her among humans, erased her own memories, and sent her through a rift that closed behind her. But blood called to blood, and the veil was thinning. Nix nuzzled her hand as if sensing her thoughts. She opened her eyes and looked up at the stars. They were watching, and this time she would not hide. She would remember, and she would fight. The forest beyond the academy dome stretched for miles, thick with black pines and silver moss that glowed faintly in the dark. The ground was soft underfoot, and the air hummed with a quiet energy that made Lila's skin tingle. Nix moved ahead of her, silent on padded feet, his wings folded tight against his back. Every few steps he paused, ears twitching, eyes scanning the trees. They had been walking for hours. Lila did not know where they were going, but her feet did, deep in her bones. Something pulled her forward, a memory. Not of place, but of feeling, like a song, half remembered, a name spoken in sleep. She followed it as they walked. The forest changed. The trees grew taller, their bark shimmering with veins of pale blue light. The air grew warmer, though the sky remained dark, and the stars above seemed closer, brighter, as if the veil between worlds had thinned. Nick stopped suddenly. He let out a low growl and flattened his ears. Lila froze ahead between two twisted trunks. Something moved. Not an animal, not a persona. Ripple-like heat rising from stone, but colder. She knew it, Korax. She raised her hand slowly and traced a small symbol in the air, just enough to steady herself. Not enough to draw attention. The ripple paused, then drifted away. Like smoke caught in a breeze, Nyx exhaled sharply and turned to her eyes wide with warning. They were being watched, not just by the Coraxby. Something else. Lila knelt and pressed her palm to the earth. Beneath her fingers, the ground pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. She closed her eyes and listened. Voices not spoken but felt, old voices, guardians. They were gone, but their presence lingered in the roots in the stones. In the wind, one voice rose above the others, soft, familiar. Her mother. You are close, child. Lila's breath caught. She opened her eyes and looked at Nyx. He nodded once as if he had heard it too. They pressed on. By dawn, they reached a clearing. In the center stood a ring of standing stones, each carved with the same symbols Lila had drawn in her room. The air inside the circle shimmered like water. Nyx stepped forward but stopped at the edge. He would not enter. Lila understood. This place was for her alone. She walked into the circle. As soon as her foot touched the center, the world shifted. The forest vanished. She stood in a different place. Tall crystalline trees stretched into a sky filled with twin suns. Their leaves chimed like glass in the wind. The ground was covered in soft silver grass, and in the distance, a city of light floated above the hill. Silther, her home, a figure approached, tall, slender, with pointed ears and hair like spun moonlight. Her mother. You have returned, she said, voice like wind through reeds. I did not know. I left. You were hidden to protect you. The Corax found our last sanctuary. They erased it from memory. Even the stars forgot us, but your blood remembers. Why now? Because the veil is tearing. The Corax grow stronger. They feed on fear, and the Alliance spreads panic with every broadcast, every drill, every whispered warning. They do not know they are feeding the enemy. What must I do? Remember? Her mother reached out and touched Lila's forehead. Light flooded her mind. Images poured in. Training under the crystal trees, learning to walk between seconds to shape reality, with thought to call the dragons who were not pets but kin. Bound by blood and oath, Nyx was not just her companion. He was her oath brother, born the same day she was hidden. Sent through the rift after her to guard her until she woke. The Corax could not be killed with weapons. They existed outside time to destroy them. One had to unmake their presence, erase them from the moment they occupied. Only a Veilwalker could do that. And Lila was the last. The vision faded. Lila stood alone in the stone circle. The forest returned, but she was not the same. She turned to Nyx. His eyes gleamed with pride. They had work to do. They returned to the edge of the academy by nightfall. The dome was lit with emergency lights. Patrols moved in tight groups. Scanners swept the perimeter. The Alliance knew something was coming, but they did not know what. Lila watched from the trees. Nyx scratched the ground again, this time drawing a full symbol. Not just a warning, but a map, 3 lines intersecting a circle with a dot in the center. The Academy's core reactor. The Corax would strike there. It was the heart of the facility, the source of all power and data. If they corrupted it, they could spread fear through every system, every mind linked to the network. Lila's blood ran cold. The graduation ceremony was tomorrow. Hundreds of cadets, instructors, dignitaries from across the Alliance would gather in the main hall directly above the reactor. It was the perfect moment. She had to warn them. But who would listen? She thought of Keshi. Had believed her once. She moved through the shadows, keeping low. Nyx followed like a ghost. She found Kes in the armory cleaning his pulse pistol. He looked up when she entered. Surprise, then relief flashing in his eyes. You disappeared. He said. They are coming, Lila said. No time for questions. The Corax will attack during the ceremony. They will use the reactor to spread fear through the network. He stared at her. How do you know? Because I remember. He studied her face, then nodded. I believe you. They went to the command wing together. Commander Vielle was in the strategy room with senior officers, maps and holograms floating in the air. Kes spoke first. Sir, we have intelligence on the Corax attack. Vielle turned, eyes narrowing, then saw Lila behind him. His expression hardened. Her again, she stepped forward. They will strike the reactor during the ceremony. They do not want to destroy the academy. They want to infect it to make everyone forget who they are. Ridiculous, it is not, she said. Look at the patterns, missing patrols, distorted signals. Cadets having nightmares. All signs of Corax presence. Dr. Marin entered, then holding a data pad. her face pale. The deep scan we ran on her. It detected residual energy signatures consistent with pre-collapse. Siltheri tech. The room fell silent. Silther was Mytha bedtime story. But Dr. Marin did not look like she was telling a story. Vale turned to Lila. If you are telling the truth, what do you suggest? Shut down the reactor. Isolate the network station armed. Guards at every access point and let me stand in the core chamber. Why you? Because they cannot erase me. I remember them. He hesitated, then nodded. Do it. Through the night. The academy prepared. The reactor was powered down to minimal levels. The network, severed the main hall secured. Lila stood in the core chamber. Deep beneath the dome, the walls pulsed with soft blue light. The air thick with the hum of dormant machinery. Nyx lay coiled at her feet. Eyes closed but alert, she waited. The ceremony began. Above voices echoed through the vents. Music played, a speech started. Then the lights flickered, cold spread through the chamber. The air grew, heavy shadows pooled in the corners. One by one they rose, tall thin figures with hollow eyes and mouths too wide. Corax, you cannot stop us, they whispered in her mind. You are one against many. Lila did not answer. She raised her hands and began to draw. Not one symbol, but many circles within circles, lines that bent and twisted back on themselves. Light bloomed from her fingertips, the chamber filled with a soft golden glow. The Corax hissed and lunged, Nyx roared, and leapt. Fire erupted from his jaws, not orange but blue-white, burning with memory. Not heat. The Corax screamed as the flames touched them, not in pain but in recognition. They were being seen, truly seen, and that was their end. Lila stepped forward and touched the nearest one on the chest. She did not push. She pulled from the space between heartbeats. The Corax unraveled like thread pulled from old cloth. It vanished, not dead, unmade. One by one she faced them. Nyx burned their edges, she unmade their centers. The chamber grew quiet. The last Corax stood before her. Trembling, you are the last Veil Walker. It said, and you are already forgotten. Lila replied. She touched it, and it was gone. Above, the ceremony continued unaware, but Lila knew. This was only the beginning. The Corax had tested the academy. Now they would bring war, and she would be ready. Nyx nudged her hands. She looked down and smiled. They had remembered who they were. Now they would remind the galaxy humans were not defenseless. They carried the oldest blood and the deepest fur. The graduation ceremony ended with cheers and handshakes. No one above knew what had happened below. No one saw the shadows that had gathered in the core chamber. No one felt the cold that had seeped through the walls, but Lila knew they would not stay hidden for long. The Corax had tasted the Academy's fear and found it sweet. They would return with more than whispers. This time, they would bring Warby morning. The Alliance received its first real warning. A deep space relay station on the outer rim went silent. Not destroyed, not damaged, just empty, every being aboard gone. No signs of struggle, no distress call, just cold metal and empty beds. The log showed the last entry was a single phrase spoken by the station's commander. We do not remember who we are. Panic spread, command locked down all major hubs, recalled fleets, tightened borders. But Lila knew lockdowns would not stop the Corax. They did not need ships or weapons. They slipped through cracks in time, through moments of doubt, through the space between breaths. She stood on the observation deck watching the stars with Nyx at her side. His scales duller than before, his breathing shallow. The blue fire had cost him. He had burned too much of himself in the core chambers. Knelt and pressed her forehead to his. Rest, she whispered. He closed his eyes but did not sleep. Commander Vale found her there. We lost the relay station, he said, voice low. I know do. You know why? Because they are erasing more than lives. They are erasing. Meaning, he looked at her not with suspicion now, but with something like awe. You are not just human, are you? I am human, she said. But I carry more than my species knows. He nodded. Then we need you. The Alliance had called an emergency war council on the orbital command station high above the moon. They wanted Lila to attend, she agreed, but only if Nyx came too. They made an exception. The shuttle ride was silent. The stars stretched endlessly outside the viewport. Lila watched them not as points of light, but as memories, each one a place her people once walked. Each one a story half forgotten. The command station was a massive ring of steel and glass. Spinning slowly against the black, the interior was bright, sterile, filled with beings from every corner. Of the Alliance, they gathered in the central chamber, a wide dome with a holographic galaxy map floating in the center. Lila entered. With Nyx beside her, all eyes turned to her, some with fear, some with hope. Most with confusion. At the center of the room stood Admiral Cora, a human woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a voice that carried without shouting. She had led the Alliance fleet for 10 cycles and had never lost a major engagement. "You are Lila," she said. "Yes." The Admiral studied her, then nodded. "You stopped the Corax in the core chamber." "I did. How be remembering?" The Admiral turned to the map. A red pulse spread from the outer rim, moving inward, consuming systems one by one. Every world it touched went silent. No signals, no survivors, just emptiness. "They are moving faster now," she said. "We cannot fight what we cannot see." "You do not need to see them," Lila said. "You need to remember yourselves." The room fell quiet. "What does that mean?" A Grath officer asked. "Fear feeds them. The more you panic, the stronger they become. If you hold to who you are, if you anchor yourselves in memory, they cannot take you." "How do we do that?" Lila looked at the Admiral. "I can teach you for 3 days." Lila worked with the Alliance officers, not in war rooms, but in quiet chambers. She taught them to trace the symbols, to focus on moments of clarity, to hold a single memory so tightly that nothing could pry it loose. A Varelian clutched a feather from his first flight. A Grath hummed a song his mother sang. A Senthi held a smooth stone from her homeworld. Lila walked among them, her voice calm, steady. "Remember who you are. Remember why you fight. Remember that you exist." Nyx stayed near her, his strength slowly returning, his eyes brighter with each passing hour on. The 4th day, the red pulse reached the inner colonies. The Corax were coming. The Alliance prepared, not with weapons alone, but with memory ships powered up their shields. Not just energy fields, but data loops, filled with personal logs, songs, family, voices, anything to anchor the crew in reality. Lila stood on the bridge of the flagship with Admiral Cora beside her. Nyx lay coiled near the command console, his tail flicking slowly. On the view screen, the void rippled. Not with ships with absence, the Corax came not as an armada but as a wave of forgetting. The stars themselves seemed to dampen the attack. Began not with explosions but with silence. Communications cut out, sensors failed. Crew members froze, eyes wide, hands trembling. But this time they did not fall. They clutched their anchors. They whispered their names. They held on. Lila stepped forward and placed her hands on the ship's main console. She closed her eyes and reached into the space between heartbeats, the same space her mother had taught her to walk. She pulled, not on the Corax but on the veil. Light erupted from the ship. Not fire, not energy, but pure presence. A wave of remembrance. It spread through the fleet, through the stations, through every mind linked to the network. The Corax shrieked not in sound, but in the sudden return of everything they had tried to erase. They were seen. They were known. They were undone. On the bridge, a young human officer gasped and dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I remember my sister," he whispered. "I remember her." Laugh around him. Others wept with relief. The red pulse on the map shrank, then vanished. The Corax were gone. "For now, Admiral." Cora turned to Lila. "You saved us." "No," Lila said. "You saved yourselves. I only reminded you." how Nyx rose and pressed against her leg, his warmth steady, his eyes clear. The Admiral offered her a place on the High Council command of a new fleet, a home among the stars. Lila looked at Nyx, then at the stars beyond the viewport. "No," she said. "My war is not here." "Where?" "Then out there." She pointed to the dark between galaxies, where the old paths still linger, where the last of my kind might still sleep. The Admiral understood. "You will not be forgotten." Lila smiled. "Maybe that is enough." That night, she and Nyx left the station in a small scout ship, unmarked, untracked. They flew not toward any known system but into the deep void where maps ended and stories began. Somewhere out there the crystal forest waited, and this time she would not hide. She would wake it and bring the veil home. The scout ship drifted through the void far beyond the last mapped star. Its engines silent, its hull cold. Leela sat in the pilot's seat, not steering but listening. The ship was old, borrowed from the Alliance, with no name and no history, perfect for what she needed. Nix lay curled in the rear cabin, his breathing slow and steady, his scales catching the faint starlight that seeped through the viewport. They had been traveling for weeks. Not by distance, but by feeling. Leela did not follow coordinates. She followed memory, the pull in her bones, the hum in her blood. The song her mother used to sing when the veil was strong and the worlds were close. She knew they were near. The stars outside began to change. Not brighter, not larger, but different. They pulsed in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Nix lifted his head and let out a soft hum. She turned to him and nodded. They were here. The ship passed through a patch of space where the black was not empty but thick like water. It rippled as they entered, and for a moment everything went still. No sound, no light, no time. Then they emerged. Below them hung a world wrapped in silver mist, its surface hidden, but its presence undeniable. Silthir. Not a planet as others knew it, but a memory made real, a place that existed only when remembered. Leela guided the ship down through the mist. The air grew warm, the light soft green like dawn in an ancient forest. They landed in a clearing surrounded by trees with trunks of crystal and leaves that chimed in a wind no one could feel. The moment her boot touched the ground, the earth trembled, not in warning and welcome. Nick stepped out beside her, his eyes wide with awe. This was where he was born, where they both were born. The forest opened before them, a path of glowing moss leading deeper in. Leela walked it slowly, each step bringing back more. The sound of her mother's voice, the feel of Nix's scales against her cheek, the weight of the veil on her shoulders. They reached a glade at the center. In the middle stood a pool of still water, its surface reflecting not the sky but stars from another time. Leela knelt and touched the water. Ripples spread, and in them she saw them. Figures emerging from the mist elves, tall and slender, with eyes like moonlight, and hair like spun silver. Her people, not dead, not gone, waiting. The first to step forward was her mother. "You have returned," she said. I remembered. The others gathered around Nix. They touched his wings, his head, their hands gentle, full of love. He was one of them. Always had been. The Veil Walkers had not all been erased. The Korax had scattered them across time, hidden them in folds of reality where even memory could not reach. But Lila's awakening had pulled the threads back together. Now they could return. But first, the Korax had to be ended, not driven back, not hidden, ended. Her mother led her to the edge of the glade where the trees grew thin and the mist turned black. Beyond it lay the rift, the place where realities touched and tore. The Korax came from there, and there they would be. Unmet. Leela turned to Nix. He nodded. They had trained for this their whole lives, even when they did not know it. She stepped into the rift. Nix followed. The world twisted. Sound became color, color became time. They stood in the between, place where the Korax lived. Shadows moved in the distance, drawn to the warmth of their presence. Leela did not hide. She called them. Come. The shadows gathered. Hundreds of them, tall, thin, shifting like smoke, with hollow eyes and mouths too wide. You cannot unmake us all, the Korax whispered as one. We are the end of memory, you are not. Leela said, I am the keeper of its. He raised her hands and began to draw, not one symbol, but the first symbol, the one her mother had sung into the world at the beginning. Light bloomed from her chest, not from her hands. It spread through the rift, filling every corner, burning away the shadows. Not with fire, but with truth. Nix roared, and his voice was not sound but memory. He sang the song of the veil, the song that bound worlds. The Korax screamed as they were seen not as enemies but as wounds in reality, and wounds could be healed. Leela stepped forward and placed her palm on the heart of the rift. She did not push. She pulled from the space between heartbeats, from the moment before, fear from the place where all things begin. The rift closed. The Korax unraveled, not into nothing, but into what they had forgotten. They once were beings of light, lost to fear. Now remembered, the between place grew quiet. The rift sealed. Leela and Nix stood. Alone. Then the world shifted again. They were back in the glade. The elves watched in silence. Then they bowed not to a warrior, but to a guardian. Lila looked at her mother. "It is done, not done," her mother said. "But begun." The veil was whole again, and the guardians would walk it once more. In the weeks that followed, Lila and Nyx helped rebuild, not with stone or steel, but with memory. They walked the old paths, taught the young to trace the symbols, to sing the songs, to see between moments. But Lila knew her place was not only here. The galaxy still feared, and fear still called, so she and Nyx left again, not as fugitives, not as soldiers, but as keepers. They traveled from world to world, not to fight but to remind. To a Varelian colony they brought songs of flight. A Grath settlement they shared stories of strength. To human outposts they whispered that they were more than they knew. They did not stay long, just long enough to leave a symbol carved in stone, or sung in a lullaby, or drawn in the dust, a reminder you are remembered. You exist, you matter. Years passed, stories spread of a human woman with silver-streaked hair and a dragon with storm-blue eyes who appeared in times of fear and vanished when hope returned. Some called her the Veil Walker. Others called her the last elf, but most just called her Lila. And when the stars grew quiet and the dark pressed close, they remembered her name. And that was enough. Far out in the rim where no maps reached, Lila stood on a cliff overlooking a sea of crystal trees. Nyx lay beside her, his wings spread to catch the twin suns. She looked up at the sky. Somewhere out there, the Alliance kept watch. Somewhere, a child traced a symbol in the dirt and felt the air hum. Somewhere, a soldier whispered a name and stood a little taller. The war was over, but the remembering had just begun, and Lila would walk it as long as she was needed.